2 years ago, southern Idaho farmers came together and agreed to the terms of a historic water settlement agreement that removes a giant black cloud of uncertainty over water use in the Magic Valley and Eastern Snake Plain region. The agreement is expected to prevent years of litigation over water issues that could have devastated the agricultural economy in the breadbasket of Idaho. Instead of fighting over water issues in court, scores of farmers from St. Anthony to Hagerman decided it's more productive to focus on restoring the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer, ESPA for short, and work toward a sustainable future. The water dispute pitted farmers with senior surface rights on the Snake River against farmers with junior rights who pumped water from the ESPA. The positive outcome will benefit everyone who taps into the ESPA, including cities that provide drinking water for 300,000 people in the region. Many large dairy farms, Idaho Power Company's hydropower facilities, the largest rainbow trout farms in the nation, Chobani yogurt, Glanbia cheese, and other commerce and industry. Oakley rancher Scott Bedke, Speaker of the Idaho House of Representatives, mediated the settlement agreement at the request of the two groups. It took a year of many late-night meetings to resolve it.
I committed to them at the very first meeting that to bring a sack lunch and a flashlight, because we were gonna be there until we were done, and that I would wear them out.
I am really pleased with the water settlement that we've come up with. It's nationally recognized for the efforts that we've done here. It's working. We will stabilize the aquifer, and that's huge for not only Idaho's agriculture industry, but all the people of Idaho.
This was a natural progression to getting our house in order. It looks like it's going to work very well. And the good thing about it is that you got everybody, or practically everybody, to buy into it. This agreement will require substantial recharge to get the aquifer up to the level that it was in the early 90s. And I think that that's really a good idea. You look at these other states, the Ogallala aquifer, the aquifers down in California. I mean, they've just mined them. And once you've done that, it's pretty hard to get that water back.
In fact, we hope to be viewed as an example and a model of how to fix aquifers west-wide.
The core of the conflict centered over the fact that farmers with senior water rights on the Snake River were not getting their full allotment of water. Water in Idaho is managed under the prior appropriation doctrine, meaning first in time, first in right. To clarify who's first in right, the Snake River adjudication, a process of cataloging and verifying farmers' water rights, was completed in 2014. That enhanced the Idaho Department of Water Resources' ability to manage the Snake River and the ESPA conjunctively, a complex challenge in which surface water and groundwater are managed as one interconnected resource. Historically, the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer has been in decline since the 1950s. Hydrologists estimate the aquifer was being overdrafted by over 200,000 acre-feet per year. The decline has had an adverse impact on Snake River surface water flows and natural springs from Blackfoot to Hagerman. When farmers with senior rights believe they are being harmed by farmers with junior rights, they can make a water call, a legal action that can force the director of the Idaho Department of Water Resources or a judge to deliver their water and shut off junior users. Leading up to 2015, a series of water calls threatened to shut down a multitude of junior users in the Snake River Plain during the irrigation season.
So that means if my farm or my fish hatchery's not getting the water the state told me I could have, the next guy has to shut his water off till I get my water. Well, the call that came up was going to shut down 157,000 acres in the Magic Valley of farmland, 500 dairies, and 14 cities.
To avoid a massive catastrophe, the Idaho Groundwater Appropriators, a group of groundwater pumpers, raised $3.8 million to buy clean spring water from another fish company and pipe it uphill over the Snake River rim to Rangan's fish farm.
In the fall of 2014, a district court judge ruled on a water call that had been filed by the Surface Water Coalition, finding that IDWR's methodology order for determining the cutbacks to junior groundwater users should be even more frequent, severe, and widespread, so senior surface water users got their full allotment of water. The court ruling also required IDWR to shift the time when the department should issue curtailment orders to the middle or the end of the summer growing season, when it would know more detail about water availability. That could ruin a farmer's crop or reduce yields substantially. The Surface Water Coalition was comprised of Twin Falls Canal Company, Northside Canal Company, American Falls Reservoir District No. 2, Burley Irrigation District, Milner Irrigation District, Minidoka Irrigation District, and A&B Irrigation District. In the spring of 2015, the issue came to a head. It was a drought year with low mountain snowpack, meaning it would result in a smaller allotment of water overall for Snake River farmers. Junior users realized they were looking at a double whammy of more severe court-ordered water cutbacks and a drought year.
We were always able to make the water to satisfy the director's orders through leasing water out of the water bank. But with the change in the methodology order and the dry year we were having, it became clear that spring that we had a year that we were not going to be able to meet the methodology order.
Early estimates indicated that junior groundwater users would be required to provide about 90,000 acre-feet of mitigation water to farmers with senior rights, roughly the same amount of water that's stored in Lake Walcott at full pool. Further projections indicated that in 2015 and in future years with dry conditions, the impact could be as high as 250,000 acre-feet to 500,000 acre-feet of mitigation water. That spurred IGWA to reach out to the senior users, the Surface Water Coalition, to initiate a settlement deal. Tim Deeg, a Rockland farmer and chairman of IGWA, said the prospects looked dim. IGWA represented all 8 of the groundwater districts in the settlement talks. Initially, farmers were worried about having to dry up land. Their backs were against the wall.
We're just talking millions of dollars of economic loss that would be attributed to a delivery call that could be made and shut off a lot of those. So it's important that we have a supply of water year in and year out.
The Surface Water Coalition, led by Brian Olmsted of the Twin Falls Canal Company, felt the same way. They were tired of trying to manage water supplies with litigation and short-term scenarios. They wanted to find a long-term solution.
But the problem with conjunctive management was we were managing 1 year at a time. Lots of people started realizing that we should be managing this at 10 years at a time, or 20 years at a time, or 50 years at a time.
Early on, the Surface Water Coalition was willing to give IGWA time to work things out. They didn't want to impose a huge economic impact on groundwater users.
You know, we want to get our water. We don't want to put people out of business.
After the Idaho legislature completed its business in the spring of 2015, the water settlement talks began.
And that was somewhat emotional. And, as far as, people were angry and whatnot, but I think it was an important part of the process that happened, that everybody vented, so that we could get on to doing what everybody knew we had to do, and that was to solve the problem.
The parties met so many times that everyone lost count. They met in the Paul Firehouse, the Twin Falls Canal Company offices, and many other locations. The meeting place had to be large enough to provide a room for the Surface Water Coalition, a room for the groundwater districts, and a central place for Bedke to negotiate with both sides. Every district and canal company had their own lawyers, plus IDWR staff and Idaho Water Resource Board members were there to serve as a resource, along with Clive Strong, the state's top well-respected legal expert on water issues.
became very apparent for like the second meeting that it would be better if the surface water guys were in their room and the groundwater guys were in their room, and we would run shuttle diplomacy back and forth.
Farmers being farmers, people on both sides were practical, understood the issues, and wanted to find solutions. Thousands of farmers holding more than 3,000 water rights and more than 5,500 groundwater wells hung in the balance. About 1 million acres of farm ground irrigated with groundwater in the ESPA region would be affected. IDWR officials had been doing their homework on how much water would be needed to restore the aquifer and boost surface level water flows. They calculated that the ESPA had declined by 13.6 million acre-feet of water in the last 63 years, or an average of 215,873 acre-feet per year. The Surface Water Coalition and IGWA added a 10% contingency, or 21,600 acre-feet, and rounded up the number to 240,000 acre-feet. This was the amount of water that the parties agreed to stop the drop in the ESPA. If groundwater users could agree to reducing their consumption by that amount across the ESPA region, that would be a start. At the same time, the Idaho Water Resource Board was getting a new program underway that diverts Snake River water into the ESPA during the winter months to recharge the aquifer. The state's goal is to recharge an average of 250,000 acre-feet of water into the aquifer each year. So if groundwater users decreased their use by 240,000 acre-feet, and the state met its goal of recharging 250,000 acre-feet per year, the combined total of almost 500,000 acre-feet of water would not only stop the drop, but also restore the aquifer to sustainable levels. The parties put those numbers into the groundwater model for the ESPA. The results looked promising.
We put all of these hypotheticals into our model, turned the crank, and it said that it could work.
The big challenge was to convince junior groundwater users in the ESPA region to cut their water use by a total of 240,000 acre-feet, or 13% across the board. The cuts would have to be absorbed by all 9 groundwater districts. Ultimately, people like Dean Stevenson and Tim Deeg stepped up to convince their fellow groundwater users that this was the right thing to do.
From my standpoint, I had to really think about what we had done. Was it fair? Was it something that we could live with? And then sell it to my constituents, my groundwater folks. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was a fair deal. It was something that we could accomplish.
Deeg is chairman of Ireland Bank. As a banker, he knows that many farmers are borrowing large sums of money to run their farms, and a steady supply of water is crucial.
The value of water is just astronomical. Without it, we live in a desert. But with water, we have a whole host of other things that we can grow. And it's very important to us to have a supply of water that will meet our needs and is there year in and year out.
We all had to be prodded along, there were times when, Speaker Bedke took us to the woodshed, and then, when we all got taken to the woodshed, and we probably needed that to keep the agreement going forward. It was a difficult change for us.
Even so, groundwater districts in the Magic Valley area had been involved in a number of water calls and mitigation payments to senior water users, so they had more experience with that.
It's been easier for us because we've faced these curtailment notices in the past. I think it was a lot more difficult for the folks east because they had never faced a Rangan or a Clear Springs or a Hardy facilities or anything, Blue Lakes call. It was just new to them.
Bedke credits State Senator Steve Baer of Blackfoot for helping bring the Upper Valley districts along.
Well, I think it was important that Senator Baer who's the chairman of Senate Resources, joined with me to be kind of a co-facilitator. He's from Blackfoot. We're from Bingham County and the Blackfoot area, and he had relationships and experience there as a groundwater pumper. He had sold his farm, but he had some experience there that proved invaluable.
It was a hard ask to have groundwater pumpers be asked to curtail their use of water by 13.5%. It did take a great deal of education because folks were hesitant. And as a matter of fact, there was some groups of folks here in Bingham County and as in the Upper Valley both that didn't really believe that there was a shortage of water and that the aquifer was declining. And so it took some facts, and it took some figures, and it took some education in order to have those folks come to the realization that doing nothing was not the answer.
The next step was for groundwater districts and IDWR to compare notes and establish a baseline for how much groundwater was being consumed by each district over a 5-year period. Then it was left up to each district to figure out how to reduce water use by 13%, using a sliding scale to accommodate pumpers with senior rights versus those with junior rights.
The first 5% was easy. The second 5% not so easy. And the 2.5% is really tough. And really, that's really production ground that's gone.
The groundwater district leaders left it up to individual farmers as to how they'd reduce their water use. Flexibility was key. Jackson Higgs, a hydrology expert with water well consultants in Burley, explains.
IGWA as a group told the groundwater districts, we don't really care how you get to that reduction amount, you just have to get there. In talking to most of the groundwater districts, they wanted to provide as much flexibility as possible to the irrigators. Most irrigators are raised to just make things work. And so they said, let's take into account their water rights and just somehow give them a number that says this is how much water you can pump. And with that number, you figure out how you want to do it.
Groundwater pumpers are reducing their water use in a variety of ways, Higgs says.
Removing their end guns, things as simple as fixing leaks, being more efficient with watering your barley or your beets, not watering your last cutting of hay, or just taking out that last cutting of hay, not watering your stubble in the fall. There's people that fallowed entire pivots just to save water.
Overall, farmers are figuring out how to reduce water use via multiple methods. Some junior pumpers are enrolling acres into the Conservation Reserve Program and the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CREP. Programs that take marginal farmland out of production while providing payments to farmers on a per-acre basis. The payments for CREP have been increased by $30 per acre to a total of $150 to $160 per acre recently to make the program more appealing to farmers. But those increases were not approved for all counties. So far, 22 new contracts for CREP have been signed, covering 1,333 acres, and more applications are pending.
As of right now, it's the farmers learning to be creative with how they're growing their crops. They're really considering now how much it takes to get that crop. And even if they have to take a slight cut on their yield, if they can save enough water.
Mindset has to change. Instead of how many acres I have to farm is how many acre feet of water do I have to work with. This is how many acre feet I have, and how can I maximize my return with the acre feet I have.
As the Surface Water Coalition and IGWA came closer to a final agreement, they added some other components to it, including safe harbor for groundwater users. As long as the milestones of the agreement are met, the groundwater users won't have to endure new water calls by senior water users, restoring the ESPA to 1991 to 2001 levels. requiring all groundwater users to install flow meters on pumps to provide the most accurate data on how much water they are using at any given time. IGWA will acquire and deliver 50,000 acre-feet of water from the Snake River reservoirs to the Surface Water Coalition each year. IDWR will monitor 20 Sentinel groundwater wells in the ESPA region to gauge how the aquifer is responding to water reductions and recharge flows. Groundwater irrigators were required to shorten their irrigation season to April 1st through October 31st throughout the ESPA region. Support the Idaho Water Resource Board in meeting its goal of recharging an average of 250,000 acre-feet of water into the ESPA each year. To track progress on groundwater use on the ESPA, independent of the agreement, the Idaho Department of Water Resources is collecting groundwater measurements data at the beginning and end of each irrigation season. James Cefalo explains.
The original settlement agreement included a provision that talked about installation of flow meters, and that was an important component. The department too has issued an order in June of 2016 requiring water users within the water districts over the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer to install meters too. So they're actually kind of a dual requirement for the water users. Not only does the settlement agreement require it, but now there's a separate order from the department that requires flow meters. But both contemplate that these meters will be installed prior to the 2018 irrigation season. Historically, the groundwater districts have handled the measurements that are occurring within their district boundaries. However, I think the water district and the water master still plays an important role in quality control, meaning that we'll conduct periodic, unannounced inspections of the flow meters to make sure they're still functioning properly and to make sure that the data that is reported by the groundwater districts is accurate.
Overall, the settlement agreement has established benchmarks that will be tracked at key dates over time. If the ESPA does not respond adequately over time, the agreement states the groundwater users will increase recharge, reduce consumptive use, or take other measures necessary to meet the goals of the agreement. But so far, the parties are optimistic. The Idaho Water Board set a new record with recharging 317,000 acre-feet of water into the ESPA in the epic winter of 2016-17. And in the first year of the settlement agreement, groundwater users reduced water use and recharged the aquifer on their own to accomplish more than 200,000 acre-feet of water savings and aquifer enhancement. In the spring of 2017, ESPA monitoring wells showed vast improvement already, showing an increase of 660,000 acre-feet of storage overall.
And the beauty of it is today, one of the things that we set up were 28 Sentinel wells. So there was 28 keyholes that we could all look through into the aquifer, if you will, and see how the aquifer was responding to the agreement. And I'm happy to report that today 27 out of the 28 Sentinel wells has shown improvement, and that collectively the level in the aquifer has risen. It looks like by over a foot. So that's important. It's not huge in a historical perspective. It's not back where it was in 1960, but it is certainly better than it was. We've stopped the drop, and now we're building.
We didn't expect to see any turnaround in the Sentinel wells in the aquifer for a good 5 or 6 years. And holy moly, we get blessed with a great year of water. I'm proud of that everyone stepped up. We had a huge problem, and that we solved it. I'm confident that that when I'm gone, that everyone will see the wisdom of this. Every politician from day one has said that water is the lifeblood of Idaho, and that's been the case. It is the case, and it will be the case. So thoughtful legislators going forward
we'll always be mindful of that and make the requisite investments in in our most basic natural resource here in the state.
Participants in the water settlement talks say that the deal was just as important to Idaho's water resources as the Swan Falls Agreement forged in the 1980s. Swan Falls was a negotiated agreement that achieved a balance between Idaho Power's hydropower operations while allowing for continued water use upstream on the Snake River. The agreement also set minimum flows for winter and summer on the Snake River at the Murphy Gauge near Swan Falls Dam.
The one thing we wanted to do when we were talking about ways of resolving the Swan Falls controversy were to, number one, get an adjudication going so that people's rights were prioritized and cataloged. And then number two, to lay out a way of getting that water managed. This agreement was a real milestone in getting that done. Optimizing the resource, making sure that the seniors were protected in their rights, but making water available for the juniors too.
I think it's something we needed to have, and so it's the future, and we're going to have to figure out if we're going to go forward and still be farming here in another 50 years. We're going to need to figure out how to make it go forward.